If you cast that line again, I'm calling the police. The guard barked as he ripped the rod from the elderly fisherman's hands. Nobody defended him. No one even spoke. Only his old navy cap fell to the wooden dock as he turned away, carrying the broken rod like a folded flag. But the next morning, boats began cutting through the mist. Sleek, silent, military gray. Who had called them? And why had the lake suddenly remembered the man it once belonged to? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Elias Warren was 74 years old, a former Navy man whose weathered face had seen more sunrises over Lakeside than anyone else in town. Born and raised in this small community, he had served his country at sea before returning to the place where water met land in the gentlest of embraces. For 40 years he had cast his nets into these waters every morning, his silhouette a familiar sight against the dawn light. He wasn't fishing for profit or sport. Most of his catch went to the community church's soup kitchen, the local homeless shelter, or elderly neighbors who could no longer fish for themselves. His routine was as predictable as the tides. Rise before dawn, row his small wooden boat to the center of the lake, return with enough fish to feed those who needed it most. The town of Millwater had changed around him. Tourism had gradually replaced the fishing and timber industries that once sustained the local economy. Trendy coffee shops and boutique stores now lined streets where hardware stores and tackle shops once stood. Still, Elias remained a constant, his faded USS Liberty cap a silent testament to his service. The crisis began when the town council, facing budget shortfalls, sold the public lake and surrounding parkland to Horizon Leisure Group, a private resort developer, promising to transform the area into a luxury destination. The deal had happened quickly, with minimal public input and maximum political maneuvering. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Elias arrived at his usual spot as the first hints of orange touched the eastern sky. He unloaded his tackle box from his ancient pickup truck, adjusted his navy cap, and made his way down the wooden dock that had supported his weight for decades. The air was crisp with early autumn chill, mist rising from the lake's surface like spirits greeting an old friend. He had just unfolded his collapsible chair when a voice cut through the morning silence. "Sir, this is private property now. You need to leave immediately." Elias turned to find a young security guard approaching, dressed in a new uniform with the Horizon logo prominently displayed. "I've been fishing here since before your parents were born, son," Elias replied calmly, continuing to prepare his line. "That doesn't matter anymore." The guard's voice hardened. "The lake is under new management. No fishing without a proper permit from Horizon Leisure." Elias reached into his worn jacket, pulling out a dog-eared card, a special fishing exemption the previous mayor had granted him years ago, in recognition of his community service. "I have permission," he said. The guard barely glanced at the card before snatching it from Elias's hand. With deliberate slowness, he tore it in half. "This is worthless now, old man. New owners, new rules." Someone on the shore had started filming the confrontation on their phone. Elias could hear laughter as the security guard gripped his arm, pulling him away from the water's edge. "Wait," Elias said, reaching for his fishing rod that was propped against the dock railing. As he moved, the guard shoved him roughly. Elias stumbled and the rod fell, snapping against the wooden planks with a crack that seemed to echo across the water. "Consider that your warning," the guard said, loud enough for his audience. "Next time, there'll be trespassing charges." In the video that would later circulate online, you could see Elias kneeling to pick up the broken pieces of his rod, a gift from his late wife on their final anniversary, before cancer took her. He gathered the fragments as carefully as if he were folding a flag at a military funeral. From the growing crowd of morning joggers and curious onlookers, not a single voice rose in his defense. Some filmed, others whispered. Most simply watched, uncomfortable but unwilling to interfere with what seemed like the inevitable march of progress. A young man in expensive running gear spoke loudly to his companion. "About time they clean this place up. That old guy's been squatting on prime real estate for years." Elias heard but did not respond. With dignity that seemed to belong to another era, he tucked the broken rod under his arm and walked back to his truck. Behind him, the security guard was already placing "No fishing private property" signs along the dock. As Elias drove away, the morning sun finally cleared the horizon, illuminating the lake with golden light. In his rearview mirror, he could see construction vehicles beginning to arrive, the advance guard of a transformation that would leave no room for men like him. What no one noticed as they focused on the embarrassed old man was how his fingers had instinctively folded the torn permit along precise military lines, and how his eyes, before they turned away from the water, had scanned the horizon with the practiced vigilance of someone who had once watched for enemies approaching from the sea. Elias's home stood at the edge of the forest, a small cabin he had built with his own hands, after returning from service. Unlike the lakefront properties now selling for millions, his modest dwelling valued functionality over appearance. The wooden walls held decades of memories, photographs of naval vessels, certificates of commendation, and a shadow box containing his service medals that he never discussed with anyone. Inside, he carefully placed the broken fishing rod on the table and opened a cedar chest that contained his most precious possessions. From within, he removed a precisely folded American flag, the one that had draped his wife Annabelle's coffin 8 years. Beside it lay his Navy insignia and a faded photograph of his unit standing on the deck of the USS Liberty. Elias had been one of only a handful of survivors when their vessel had been caught in a storm. He had personally secured lifelines that saved 3 of his shipmates from being washed overboard. That day had taught him the true value of holding fast when everything around you threatened to give way. He sat heavily in his armchair, feeling the weight of his years more acutely than usual. Through his window, he could see the lake glistening in the distance, now as inaccessible to him as if it were on another continent. Day 14 since being banned from the lake, he wrote in the leather-bound journal he had kept since his Navy days. I've never felt more like a stranger in the place I've called home my entire life. The retirement community in Phoenix where his daughter lived had been calling more frequently lately. It's time, Dad, she would say. This town isn't yours anymore. Each time, he had gently refused. How could he explain that his roots went deeper than property deeds or municipal boundaries? That the rhythm of the lake's waters was synchronized with his own heartbeat. As evening fell, Elias checked his ancient flip phone and discovered he had become an unwitting internet celebrity. The video of his humiliation had been shared thousands of times, set to comical music with captions like, "Boomer can't read no trespassing signs," and "Old fish fights, new lake owners and loses." The comments beneath were even worse. That generation thinks they own everything just because they've been around forever. Maybe if he'd invested in real estate instead of fish, he wouldn't be crying now. Time to move to a retirement home, Grandpa. The world belongs to those who can pay for it. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Bill Jenkins from the hardware store, one of the few longtime residents still running a business downtown. Heard what happened at the lake, Bill said, accepting the cup of coffee Elias offered. Rough deal. It's their property now, Elias replied, his voice free of bitterness. They can do what they want with it. Bill shifted uncomfortably. Town's changing, Elias. Maybe it's time to consider moving on. Elias finished for him. This is my home, Bill. I buried Annabelle here. My whole life is in this soil. I understand, but these developers, they've got the council in their pocket. They're talking about making the entire lakefront a members-only resort. Annual fees more than what most folks around here make in a month. And what does the town think about that? Bill looked away. Most of the original families have already sold and moved. The newcomers, they want the property values to keep rising. They're calling it progress. After Bill left, Elias stood on his porch, looking toward the water that had sustained generations of Millwater residents. In the gathering darkness, he could see the new security lights installed along the shore, bright and intrusive against the natural landscape. He remembered teaching local children to fish on summer mornings, showing them how to respect the water and its creatures. He thought of the countless community fish fries he had supplied, the elderly widows who depended on his weekly delivery, the handshakes from 3 successive mayors thanking him for his contributions to Millwater's food pantry, all erased with the stroke of a pen transferring ownership to people who saw the lake not as a living entity, but as a line item on a development plan. His phone rang again, his daughter calling from Arizona. They sent me the video, Dad, she said, her voice tight with concern. This is exactly why I've been asking you to come live near us. It's just a misunderstanding, he replied, unwilling to burden her with his grief. It's not, and you know it. That town doesn't deserve you anymore. They've forgotten who built it, who kept it going through hard times. Perhaps she was right. As darkness settled completely over the lake, Elias thought about the generations of Warrens who had fished these waters, including his father, who had taught him to cast his first line, and his grandfather, who had helped establish the town's first fish market. I'll think about it, he told his daughter, though they both knew he wouldn't leave. Some men, like certain species of ancient trees, can only survive in the soil where they first took root. He wasn't asking for money, wasn't demanding right. He just wanted to cast his line in the waters he'd been connected to his entire life. If you've ever felt pushed out from a place you once called home, type still. The following morning broke with unusual clarity, the kind of crystalline autumn day that photographers chase but rarely capture. Elias awoke before dawn, as was his habit, and sat on his porch with a cup of black coffee, Without his daily fishing ritual, the early hours stretched before him, empty and unfamiliar. Then at precisely 0700 hours he heard it, the distinctive rumble of marine engines approaching from the far side of the lake. Not the recreational boats that typically populated the water, but something with more purpose, more authority in its mechanical voice. Elias set down his coffee and walked toward the shore, his curiosity overcoming his reluctance to face the new private property and its guardians again. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. 8 naval rigid-hull inflatable boats, flying American flags at their sterns, were advancing in perfect formation toward the main dock. Each vessel contained uniformed Navy personnel, not in everyday working uniforms, but in their service dress blues, as if attending a formal military function. Word spread quickly through Millwater. Residents poured out of houses and businesses, gathering along the shore. Workers at the new development site paused, construction vehicles falling silent, as all eyes turned toward the approaching flotilla. The security guard who had confronted Elias the previous day stood uncertainly at the dock entrance, his radio raised to his lips, but apparently receiving no instructions on how to handle a naval incursion. The lead boat docked with precision, and from it stepped a tall man with silver hair and the insignia of a retired Navy colonel. Samuel Hollister moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Elias standing at a distance. "Attention," Colonel Hollister called, and every uniformed sailor snapped to perfect posture. The colonel stepped forward, addressed the gathering crowd, and spoke in a voice that carried across the water. "My name is Colonel Grant Hollister, United States Navy, retired 42 years ago, during the storm that claimed the USS Liberty. Chief Petty Officer Elias Warren saved 12 men from my unit, carrying the injured through hazardous waters to safety." A murmur ran through the onlooker. Many glanced at Elias with new eyes, trying to reconcile the quiet old fisherman with this unexpected history. "What many of you don't know," the colonel continued, "is that after his honorable discharge, Elias Warren continued his service, right here. During the flood of '89, he used his boat to evacuate 27 residents from the eastern shore. During the drought of '95, he installed water purification systems for families with contaminated wells. For 4 decades, he has conducted daily water quality monitoring that the Environmental Protection Agency has relied upon for their regional assessments." From another boat stepped a younger man in uniform. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Eric Dawson. I exist because Elias Warren carried my father through gunfire on his back during the final evacuation of Saigon. When my father couldn't afford college for me, Mr. Warren anonymously provided a scholarship fund for veterans' children in this county. I'm here because a man who asked nothing for himself gave everything for others." The Horizon Leisure Group manager pushed through the crowd, clipboard in hand. "This is a private event space now," he began. "You can't Actually, we can," interrupted another figure emerging from the third boat, a woman in a formal dark suit. "I'm Paige Whitaker, Department of Interior. This lake falls under the National Historical Waterways Protection Act, due to its documented use by 3 Native American tribes. The sale was approved without the federally required historical assessment." She held up an official-looking document. "As of 0600 this morning, all development has been temporarily suspended, pending a full environmental and historical review." The security guard who had torn Elias's permit looked increasingly uncomfortable as a sailor approached him, handing him a folded sheet of paper. "This is a copy of Elias Warren's original agreement with the town of Millwater, dated." The sailor explained, "It grants him lifetime fishing rights as compensation for his voluntary environmental monitoring services. This document supersedes any change in ownership, as it's classified as an environmental service contract with federal recognition." Camera phones recorded everything, but the tone of the filming had transformed from mockery to respectful documentation. The #sign was already trending locally. The veterans had come prepared. They erected a memorial on the shoreline, a simple plaque commemorating the USS Liberty, and recognizing Elias's decades of service both in the Navy and to Millwater. They formed an honor guard along the dock, creating a path that led to Elias's usual fishing spot. Colonel Hollister approached Elias, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, and extended his hand. "The men and women here today represent 4 generations of sailors, who haven't forgotten what honor looks like." He said, "We heard what happened. Word travels fast among veterans." Elias gripped his old commander's hand firmly, a motion threatening to break through his composed exterior. "You didn't have to come all this way, Sam." "Yes, we did," the colonel replied simply. "No one gets to erase what you've done, not for us and not for this town." The crowd had grown as news spread throughout Millwater.
Among them were faces from the town council, looking increasingly sheepish as they realized the depth of their miscalculation. The mayor himself arrived, hurriedly straightening his tie as he made his way to the improvised podium that had been set up. On behalf of Millwater, he began glancing nervously between the veterans, the developers and the federal representative. I want to announce that we'll be implementing an immediate review of the lake sale contract. Furthermore, we are establishing a permanent veterans landing zone on the eastern shore with guaranteed public access and special recognition of Elias Warren's lifetime fishing right. He extended a new laminated permit toward Elias, who accepted it quietly. What none of the speeches captured, what no video could adequately convey, was the transformation that had occurred in how the townspeople looked at Elias. The invisible barrier that had separated him, the old man who belonged to a disappearing past, had dissolved. In its place was a new understanding that some people's worth can't be measured in property values or economic impact report. As the formal proceedings concluded, Elias did something that surprised everyone. He walked to his truck, retrieved his spare fishing rod, older but still intact, and returned to the dock. With the practice motions of a man who had performed this ritual thousands of times, he baited his hook, cast his line into the water, and simply sat. One by one, the veterans joined him, sitting in respectful silence along the dock. No speeches, no further declaration, just the quiet solidarity of those who understood that some battles are fought, not with weapons, but with simple dignified persistence. The week following what locals now referred to as the Navy Day brought changes to Millwater that few could have predicted. The story had gone viral, picked up by national news outlets, framing it as a David versus Goliath tale for the modern age. Horizon Leisure Group, facing a public relations nightmare and potential legal challenges from the Department of Interior, announced they were reconsidering the development approach to honor the area's cultural and historical significance. A small ceremony was held to officially name the eastern dock Elias's Landing, Keeper of the Waters. The sign, crafted by a local woodworker, was simple but dignified, much like the man it honored. Elias attended without fanfare, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding that the gesture wasn't just about him, it was about establishing a precedent for what the community valued. What brought him genuine joy, however, were the children. They began appearing at the dock in the mornings, initially out of curiosity about the old man from the viral video, but soon with genuine interest in learning what he knew. Elias taught them, with the same patience he had once shown young sailors, how to tie the perfect knot, how to read the water's surface for signs of fish below, how to wait in stillness until the right moment presented itself. "Do you ever get scared of the water?" a young girl asked him one morning, as she struggled to bait her hook. Elias smiled, helping her small fingers secure the worm. "I was terrified when I was beneath it, during the storm that took my ship, but I've never been afraid sitting beside it, watching over." "Because you're friends?" she asked, with a child's directness. "Because we understand each other," he replied. "Water remembers everything it touches. It was here long before us, and will be here long after. The trick is learning to listen to what it's trying to tell you." She considered this with surprising seriousness, then nodded as if he had confirmed something she'd already suspected. The security guard who had torn Elias's permit never returned to his post. However, one morning Elias arrived to find a brand new USS Liberty cap placed carefully on his usual bench. No note, no explanation, just the cap, its navy blue fabric stiff with newness, the gold embroidery catching the morning light. Elias didn't wear it. Instead, he laid his hand upon it briefly, acknowledging the gesture, before setting up his fishing gear with his old faded cap still firmly in place. Some apologies are better left unspoken, and some lessons more powerful when demonstrated rather than declared. Mayor Hensley, sensing the shifting political winds, established a Veterans Advisory Council for future development projects, with Elias reluctantly accepting a position. The council's first recommendation, unanimously approved, was to allocate a portion of tourism revenue to maintaining public access to the natural resources that had sustained the town long before it became a destination for wealthy vacationers. Colonel Hollister returned monthly, sometimes bringing other veterans, sometimes coming alone to sit beside Elias in the pre-dawn hours when the lake was at its most serene. Their conversations were sparse but meaningful, focusing on the water, the changing seasons, the eternal rhythms that remained constant even as the world around them transformed at an ever-accelerating pace. "They're still planning to build on the western shore," the colonel mentioned during one such visit. "Luxury condos, marina, the works." Elias nodded, adjusting his line. "Change comes whether we welcome it or not. The important thing is making sure some things remain." "Like you," the colonel said, "still holding your position after all these years." "Like the water," Elias corrected him gently. "I'm just passing through, same as everyone, but what we do while we're here, that matters. The lake itself seemed to have weathered the controversy with typical impassivity. Its surface still reflected the sky above, still rippled with the breeze, still yielded fish to those patient enough to wait. Whatever human dramas played out along its shores were merely momentary disruptions in its ancient existence. In early spring, nearly 6 months after the Navy Day, Elias arrived at his usual spot to find a class of elementary school students waiting, clipboards in hand. Their teacher explained they were conducting a year-long science project about the lake's ecosystem, and hoped Elias might share some of his observations. What followed was a master class in practical ecology. Elias showed them how to test water quality using simple tools, how to identify different fish species, how to recognize signs of environmental stress. The children recorded everything, wide-eyed at knowledge that couldn't be found in their textbooks or online. Miss Warren has been keeping daily records longer than the EPA, the teacher explained to her students. His notebooks contain climate data that scientists are now using to track long-term environmental changes in our region. A boy raised his hand. "But you're not a scientist," he said to Elias with a child's bluntness. "No," Elias agreed, "I'm just someone who's been paying attention for a very long time." Perhaps that was his true legacy, not the medals in his cedar chest, or the newly named dock, but this accumulated wisdom born of daily observation and unwavering presence. In a world increasingly driven by data analytics and computer modeling, Elias represented something more fundamental, the irreplaceable value of bearing witness, of marking the slow changes that only become visible through decades of faithful attention. The luxury development did eventually proceed on the western shore, though scaled back significantly from original plans. From Elias's fishing spot he could see the modern buildings rising, their glass surfaces reflecting the same waters he had watched for a lifetime. He didn't resent the newcomers. After all, they too had been drawn by the lake's beauty, its promise of peace. Perhaps they would learn what he had discovered long ago, that the true value of a place isn't in what you can take from it, but in how deeply you allow yourself to belong to it. Elias often said little, but when he spoke it was with the stillness of someone who had seen the worst and chose peace anyway. That morning on the dock, surrounded by strangers turned kin, he didn't need to explain what the lake meant to him. It was etched in the way he cast his line, not to conquer but to connect, not for legacy, but for belonging. Some people live their entire lives just to quietly sit in the same spot, holding on to what others discard, but only when they're pushed away do we realize, not everyone can be replaced. You might forget this story in a few days, but if nobody retells it, history will remain silent forever. Subscribe to Incredible Stories, where justice, kindness, and memory are protected until the end.